Book 4, Chapter 9 of The Female Quixote, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Bob Neufeld. The Female Quixote, by Charlotte Lennox. Book 4, Chapter 9. Containing a love letter in the heroic style, with some occasional reasonings by Lucy, full of wit and simplicity. Our fair heroine, having ended the foregoing soliloquy, took up the letter and gave it to Lucy, who had, all the time she was speaking, observed a profound silence, mixed with a most eager attention. "Here," pursued she, "carry it to the person who brought it, and bid him tell his master that, lest I should find anything in it which may offend me, I have chosen not to read it; and if he is wise, he will profit by my concern for him, and take care how he hazards displeasing me a second time by an importunity of this kind, which I shall not so easily pardon him." Lucy, who had taken particular notice of this speech, in order to remember every word of it, when she repeated it again, went conning her lesson to the place where she had desired the servant to wait her coming. But he was gone, such being indeed his master's orders; for he was apprehensive that, following the custom of the ladies in romances, Arabella would return his letter, and therefore, to deprive her of an opportunity of sending it back that night, he ordered his man to say he waited for an answer, but as soon as he conveniently could, to come away without one. Lucy, in a great surprise at the servant's going away, returned to her lady with the letter in her hand, telling her she must needs read it now, since the person who brought it was gone. "It must be confessed," said Arabella, taking the letter from her with a smile, "he has fallen upon an ingenious device to make me keep it for this night; and since, haply, I may be mistaken in the contents, I have a mind to open it." Lucy did not fail to confirm her lady in this design, and Arabella, making as if she yielded to the importunities of her confidante, opened the letter, which she found as follows: "The unfortunate and despairing Bellemour, to the divine Arabella. Madam, since it is doubtless not only with your permission, but even by your commands, that your uncle Sir Charles Glanville comes to pronounce the sentence of my death in the denunciation of your anger, I submit, madam, without repining at the rigour of that doom you have inflicted on me. Yes, madam, this criminal, who has dared to adore you with the most sublime and perfect passion that ever was, acknowledges the justice of his punishment, and since it is impossible to cease loving you, or to live without telling you he does so, he is going voluntarily to run upon that death your severity makes him wish for, and the greatness of his crime demands. Let my death, then, O divine Arabella, expiate the offence I have been guilty of, and let me hope those fair eyes, that have beheld me with scorn when alive, will not refuse to shed some tears upon my tomb, and that, when you remember my crime of loving you, you will also be pleased to remember that I died for that crime, and wish for no other comfort in death but the hope of your not hating when he is no more. The unhappy Bellemour." Arabella, who had read this letter aloud, sighed gently at the conclusion of it; but poor Lucy, who was greatly affected at so dolorous an epistle, could not restrain her tears, but sobbed so often and with so much violence as at length recalled her lady from the reverie into which she was plunged. "What ails you?" said she to her confidante, greatly surprised. "What is the cause of this unseemly sorrow?" "Oh, madam!" cried Lucy, her sobs making a frequent and unpleasing interruption in her words, "I shall break my heart, to be sure. Never was such a sad, mournful letter in the world. I would cry my eyes out for the poor gentleman. Pray excuse me, madam, but indeed I can't help saying you are the most hard-heartedest lady I ever knew in my born days. Why, to be sure, you don't care if 100 fine gentlemen should die for you, though their spirits were to haunt you every night. Well, I would not have what your ladyship has to answer for all the world." "You are a foolish wench," replied Arabella, smiling at her simplicity. "Do you think I have any cause to accuse myself, though 5,000 men were to die for me? 'Tis very certain my beauty has produced very deplorable effects. The unhappy Hervey has expiated by his death the violence his too desperate passion forced him to meditate against me. The no less guilty, the noble unknown Edward, is wandering about the world in a tormenting despair, and stands exposed to the vengeance of my cousin, who has vowed his death. My charms have made another person, whose character ought to be sacred to me, forget all the ties of consanguinity, and become the rival of his son, whose interest he once endeavoured to support. And lastly, the unfortunate Belmour consumes away in an hopeless passion, and, conscious of his crime, dooms himself, haply with more severity than I desire, to a voluntary death, in hopes thereby of procuring my pardon and compassion when he is no more. All these, Lucy, as I said before, are very deplorable effects of my beauty. That my will has no part in the miseries that unfortunate beauty occasions, and that though I could even wish myself less fair in order to avoid giving so much unhappiness to others, yet these wishes would not avail. And since, by a fatal necessity, all these things will happen whether I would or no, I must comfort myself under the uneasiness which the sensibility of my temper makes me feel, by the reflection that with my own consent I contribute nothing to the misfortune of those who love me." "Will your ladyship, then, let poor Sir George die?" said Lucy, who had listened very attentively to this fine harangue, without understanding what it meant. "Questionless, he must die," replied Arabella, "if he persists in his design of loving me." "But pray, madam," resumed Lucy, "cannot your ladyship command him to live, as you did Mr. Hervey and Mr. Glanville, who both did as you bid them?" "I may command him to live," said Arabella, "and there is no question but he would obey me, if I likewise permit him to love me. But this last not being fit for me to do, I see no way to prevent the sad resolution he has taken." "To be sure, madam," returned Lucy, "your ladyship knows what you ought to do better than I can advise your ladyship, being that you are more learned than me. But for all that I think it is better to save life than to kill, as the Bible book says; and since I am sure your ladyship is a good Christian, if the gentleman dies for the want of a few kind words or so, I am sure you will be troubled in mind about it." "It must be confessed," said Arabella, smiling, "that though your solicitations are not very eloquent, they are very earnest and affecting, and I promise you I will think about it. And if I can persuade myself I am doing no wrong thing by concerning myself about his preservation, I will dispatch you to-morrow morning with my orders to him to live, or at least to proceed no further in his design of dying till he has further cause." Lucy, being extremely glad she had gained her point, called in her lady's other women, who, having assisted her to undress, left her in her closet, to which she always retired for an hour before she went to bed. End of Book 4, Chapter 9. End of The Female Quixote, by Charlotte Lennox, Volume 1.